Chapter 2, Behind the Stars. Renner Kalo. It was beginning to get dark. The last of the Loonduns were fast asleep as we crossed from Loondu to Prile. I touched my chin with my forefinger. Was I wrong in not going after Kino's mother? I wondered. Was the professor right in telling me that I should have gone after her? Louis approached me. His face bore the semblance of a young warrior, alert and determined. He reminded me of myself when I was his age. I raised my eyebrows at him. "There's nothing here, General," he said. "All the soldiers are back, and there's no information about a boy and his traveling companions." I rubbed at my chin again. Maybe they had not crossed Loondu yet. "Could be," he said. "Call it a night. Order the men to set camp." He nodded, but instead of going away, he sat beside me. "Once we find the boy, what are we going to do?" he asked as he gazed up at the starless sky. It was an appropriate question. One where I was ashamed to admit, I wasn't quite sure what my response should be. "We will find the answers," I said. "From the boy?" "Through the boy." "Do you know why the Emperor wanted him so badly?" There were some suggestions from Dante Leban. Regardless, they were not enough to make me conclude the Emperor's actions. "Distantecus, maybe," I offered. Louis looked worried. "If it's only because of that, I don't think the Emperor would send everyone to hunt for the boy. He is an unpredictable man, irrational at times. That's why the masked warriors came into existence." Louis sighed. "Do you believe in everything the masked warriors fight for?" I looked at him in askance. The masked warriors desire to put an end to the Emperor's rule. The Emperor has changed. He has become, I paused, searching for the right word, reckless. "Do you remember the charters, General?" It was like asking if there were ghosts in Nivedon. By heart. Nobody ever becomes a war general without being able to cite each provision in the charter word for word. "I didn't mean to offend," Louis said. I shook my head slightly. "None taken." I fished for a cigar in my pocket and lit it. I handed one to Louis. "The night is young, and we've had quite an ordinary day. Let's brighten it up with these cigars." He took the cigar without another word and cut its end before lighting it. We puffed together without saying a word for a few minutes. "Sometimes, I become lost," Louis admitted. "My loyalty is to you and the masked warriors, don't question that." "I don't. We're fighting the war with war. Oppression with a desire to oppress. It doesn't feel right. Nothing would come to us on a silver platter. Sacrifices have to be made." "I know. Still. Do we have to resort to this?" I puffed at the cigar again and blew out the smoke in circles. "A man has to stand for something. For whatever it is he believes in. No one ever has it right every time. There are always shortcomings. Hesitations. Fear. But if a man questions what he stands for, that is worse than even death," I said. "We live for principles. We choose based on them." Louis and I sat together in silence. The other men were resting, but no one had started to set camp yet. No one had bothered to light a fire. The darkness, to a soldier, felt to him like a home more than any other house did. "Does it bother you that your boy is with the one we're hunting?" Louis asked. I froze. I always tried to forget that part. If I could protect my son by sending him home to his grandmother, I would. But his association with Kino had become known to the Emperor. I was only a man, and I was worried too. "I will deal with my son. I hope they're all right." Louis did not say anything anymore. He dropped the remains of the cigar on the ground and stepped on it to put it out. "I will tell the men to camp," he said. "Don't worry, General. You can focus on finding Kino. I swear to you, I will care for your boy once we retrieve them." I met Louis' eyes and saw only sincerity in them. I knew he would honor his promise, and it was gracious of him to offer to help. "Thank you, Louis," was all I said.
Quila Tash. The night was humid, but I felt cold to the bones. I rubbed my arms to make them warmer. Inside, though, my heart was frozen, like a chunk of ice had found its way inside my body. I sat outside the hut, waiting for Kino, Mayo, Pyper, and Arden to return. All right, I admit it. I sat outside waiting for Arden more than half the time and then the other half, hoping that the others were also safe. Inside the hut, Mia was still confined in the room like a produce pincher. Miro would not allow her to come out. He still sulked. Goemi, on the other hand, walked around like a dead person. Well, to give her credit, she still managed to cook and clean the house and look after Miro. Arden must have been right. Goemi must be an extraordinary girl. I may understand Arden's feelings, but it did not make me like it. I still wished I was the only girl in his life. Hey, Goemi said from behind me, and I quickly jumped to my feet. You startled me, I said. Sorry. I didn't mean to, she apologized. I sat back down again and arranged my skirts against my legs. Goemi sat beside me. I wondered how she managed to sit so comfortably and look so amazing at the same time. Well, I had to give Arden credit for liking Goemi. She did look lovely under the pale moonlight. Do you miss him? Goemi asked. She didn't have to say more. I instantly knew who she was referring to. It doesn't matter, I grumbled. Then I flushed. Of course, it does, she said. He loves you so much. Goemi giggled. Do you know that when we're together, he talks to me about you all the time? Goemi looked at me, and I blushed deeper. I ducked my head between my legs, and Goemi laughed. Don't do that. You're not a child anymore, she chastised. I see Miro do this all the time, and you don't call his attention, I argued. Well, that's because he is a child. In the head, at least, she said. I giggled before looking up. Arden likes you a lot, I said. I could not say love, my mouth was not trained to utter that word. It was Goemi's turn to blush. He's so handsome, isn't he? She gushed. I chuckled, wondering if I was jealous. I hate to admit it, but yes, he is. The first time I saw him, I couldn't believe anyone could be that good-looking. I mean, he's beautiful. He is. I agreed again. When we do perform, I sometimes hate it that most patrons only wait for his act. It's like I am the ugly assistant of the great Arden Ruby Moeller, I complained good-naturedly. A smile still touched my lips. It was good to talk about Arden with someone else. Since you've been sharing what you feel, I'd like you to know that I have insecurities too, Goemi said before blushing furiously again. I mean, have you seen him? I laughed this time. I know. When we walk together, I don't think anyone ever bothers to look at me, she said. She said it without any jealousy or hatred. Instead, her words were coated with affection for Arden. That's not exactly true, I said. Back when I hated you, I used to call you a leggy bitch. Back when you hated me, huh? She said in jest. Yeah. Which means that it was only in the past. I paused and looked up at the sky. Do I still hate her? After hearing her talk about Arden so lovingly? I shook my head and met her gaze. I don't hate you now, but an hour ago, I did. I said half-jokingly. Then we both laughed. It was an excellent night to chat and bond with a girl who was almost as old as I am. Do you think they're on their way back now? Goemi's tone became serious. I nodded. I could not bring myself to comfort her and tell her that yes, I'm sure they're on their way back now because I had doubts about that. What was taking them so long, anyway? If they rode hard the way they did upon leaving, they should have been back days ago. Which meant that, my stomach turned, that something could have gone awfully wrong. My eyes watered. I couldn't imagine life without Arden. All right, so maybe this was the worrywart in me. I tend to imagine things that weren't real, and in the process, I usually made myself cry. Like now. I could almost imagine myself moving from town to town with just my box, without anyone calling me chum. It painted a miserable image inside my head. Will you go with us? I asked. Then I lay back on the ground so I could gaze up at the sky. Goemi did not answer immediately. Instead, she copied what I did. We were silent for a while. She twisted to face me. Do you want me to? I had been expecting to hear a resounding yes from her because, Let's face it, if someone as awesome as Arden asks a girl to go with him, who would ever have the strength to say no? I mean, I literally followed him like a lovesick puppy when I was younger. And now, instead of saying the words I expected to come out of Goemi's mouth, she answered my question with another question that made a tear roll down my cheek. I turned to meet her gaze. "You are a swell lady," I said, smiling timidly. "Arden is lucky to have you. But I still hate you?" Goemi smiled. "You didn't answer my question." "Do I have to when you know I can't stand you?" I said in mockery. Then we both laughed. "It's nice," Goemi said. "Ah. You know what I mean?" I giggled. "Yes. I never had a sister. I never had anyone I could share my feelings with." "Likewise," Goemi said. From the sound of her voice, I could tell that she was also grateful for whatever relationship we had. It's not yet friendship, but we are more than acquaintances now. I beamed inside, although I think that there was some truth at the back of my head when I said that I still hated her. The night was late, but I did not feel sleepy at all. "When will Nia come out of the room?" I asked. "I don't know." She said she understood, Goemi said. "I want her out of the room. I don't like it that we're treating her like a prisoner. She's our mother." Yeah, I thought inside my head. It was so weird that Nia would allow herself to be confined in the room. Or was it? If I were the one who gave birth to someone who had the most horrible power in Akean, would I also allow myself to be manipulated into being held as a prisoner to prevent my son from wreaking havoc in the land? I nodded to myself. Perhaps, when I put it that way, Nia's actions seemed more reasonable. "Strange genes," I said, remembering that moment when I saw Nia and stared at her eyes. Goemi studied me. "What do you mean?" I said strange genes, I repeated. And again, I asked, "What do you mean?" I looked at her. "Your parents have some pretty knocked up genes. You've got blue eyes. Miro's got dark eyes. And Nia's are caramel brown. I would not be surprised if you told me that your father's got green eyes. Your forefathers must have passed on their eye colors directly to you," I said matter-of-factly. Goemi laughed nervously as though she was trying to cover something up before looking away, not meeting my gaze. She stared at the sky and started counting the stars. She closed her eyes and turned her back to me. In a few minutes, her shoulders were moving in a slow, rhythmic fashion, telling me that she had gone to sleep. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. The ground was rough, what with all the pebbles and rocks gathered around, but lying on it with a friend, the ground offered me more than comfort. It offered me a home.
Andoni San Diego. Since Dogen Ronda left Nivedan, a group of Nivens practiced wielding the swords, while another group practiced with arrows. It was as though everybody was preparing for battle. Under the blanket of the night sky, I watched as my wife walked towards me. After we were married and she gave birth to Pyper, she had gained weight, which she was not able to get rid of, regardless of how hard she labored. Her eyes were exact copies of my daughter's. And seeing my wife at this late hour reminded me of how much I missed Pyper. "Have you received any news from Dogen?" Laren asked. I avoided her eyes. It had been over a month, and Dogen had not sent me a word. I did not want to doubt his credibility, though. "News will come to me when it is needed," I answered. She stood in front of me as though she wanted to confront me, and yet, she remained quiet. "Your daughter is safe. Trust me on that," I said, although I really wasn't sure. Dogen took with him a dozen Nivens to search for Pyper. How could he miss her? Laren's jaw firmed. "I want her back here. She's 12 for the love of the gods. How can she even protect herself?" I understood her feelings. I worried about my daughter too, but the responsibility to the community far outweighed the responsibility to one's own family. "Rest easy. Dogen will find her and keep her safe," I said, trying to sound reassuring. Her face twisted in agony. "She's our only child, Andoni. If anything happens to her, I don't think I can forgive myself." With that, I stood up and put an arm around her waist. I pulled her close to me and whispered against her ear, "I promise you, I will die first before any harm befalls her." "But how can you say that when she's not around for us to protect?" Do you remember the first time she went missing for days after she learned how to swing using the vines? I said, my heart warmed upon remembering one of my fondest memories of my daughter. She called herself Monkey because she said she could outswing them. Laren laughed, but her eyes were glistening with tears. And then she would return to us, apologize and finish her pairs of sandals. It was a proper punishment. She hated that task, and because of that, her exploits decreased. Still, she's a free-spirited girl, and we cannot break her wings. You know you couldn't even if you tried. Laren pressed her cheek against my chest. I miss our daughter, and I'm worried sick about her. I miss her too. But all we can do for now is wait. My gut tightened. I cannot look for her myself and leave the town. You know the situation here now. If I so much as set foot in the outskirts of the mountains, Salvatore may push for the Nivens to oust me as the chief hunter. He's not going to do that, she said. Why not? I asked. He never favored me in the past. He still hates me now. He is my uncle. He cannot be so hard on you. I smiled at Laren. Well, thank the gods for that, or else I would have found myself an enemy, I said jokingly. Laren smiled. He is what he is. She stared into my eyes. You have to promise me, though, that if in another month we don't hear from Dogan, you will send someone else to find Pyper. A tear had fallen down her cheek. I nodded. I promise, I said. Laren still looked worried, but she relaxed in my arms. Bombay approached us, blushing. Chief Hunter, he said. My apologies for interrupting you. But Elder Mayan wishes to speak with you. In the middle of the night? I wondered what he wanted to tell me that he could not wait until tomorrow. The night sky was cloudy. It would be good to talk outside. Bring him here, I told Bombay. Bombay looked confused. Here? But he could summon the animals and attack us if we remove him from his cell. He won't. He's an honorable man. He won't compromise his principles. Bombay nodded reluctantly. If you say so, Chief Hunter. I will go and fetch him now. Laren left me and went back to our treehouse, where I supposed she would arrange Pyper's room yet again, in the hopes that she would return to us soon. Elder Mayan was walking towards me. His face was a mask. If ever there was anything important he wanted to disclose to me, it did not appear like that. More than a dozen Nivens stood ready in case the elder tried any tricks. The Nivens were far enough from where I was and yet close enough to immediately provide assistance in case something went wrong. The elder bent down and sat beside me. These days, it has become a more daunting task for me to bend than to fight with a sword. Old people's backs aren't made for sitting on the ground, he said. I glanced at him. He did not seem as though he had had a hard time at all. What is so important that you need to talk to me now? I asked. Your identity has been compromised. I glared at him. Continue. No one told you, but a Niven died at the Akean Wine Festival. A boy. His remains lay in the death tents, he said. Unburied. I stared at him in surprise. Who told you that? Where did your information come from? I asked. I kept my voice low so as not to rouse the Nivens around us. A friend, Elder Mayan said. By friend, he meant one of the animals that talked to him. I paled. No one should keep a secret like this. If our identities were compromised by a boy's death, such information should have been disclosed to me much sooner, so the hall could decide what to do about it. We cannot let one of us be scrutinized by the scholars. It would only take them a few months to realize that the skin color was not because of sickness. I felt sick to my stomach. Horror raged inside my chest. How could anyone keep this from me? Everything that I've been doing to protect our identities from the outside world would be for naught if the boy were not retrieved. It's impossible, I said. No one would keep this from me. There are ways to validate what I told you, Elder Mayan replied. But why put one's life ahead of the community? Nobody wanted to become nameless, he replied. Nameless. Dear gods. No Niven wanted to be ostracized from the community. I stood up hurriedly and sauntered away in long strides. Immediately, the Nivens around us rushed in and escorted Elder Man. Don't touch him, I warned. Let him come after me, I said. The Nivens fell back but continued following me. Sound the bells. Rouse everyone. Ask all households to step out of their tree houses, I said. I will make the rounds tonight. I heard someone running away from us to head for the bell tower. I was boiling inside, angry at the man who kept this information from me. Whoever this household was would meet the town's wrath for breaking an oath. The bell started to toll, and one by one, the tree houses became lit. The people went out, faces worried. I saw mothers clutching at their babies. I saw children holding tightly against their mothers' skirts. The men's eyes were already veiled, ready to attack, ready to fight, ready to give up their lives to protect our land. But among these faces was a traitor that broke the Niven tenets. I stopped walking upon reaching the clearing, the heart of Nivedon. I looked around before shouting. Who among you has lost a family member? I shouted. There was only silence. Confused faces gazed back at me. Someone died in a foreign land, and, I paused, blood pumping wildly in my veins. I was too angry to think straight, I was not informed. I looked at the faces around me, at the men and women of Nivedon, daring them to meet my gaze and tell me the truth. Death is a painful event not only to the family but to all of us here. Death is not something we should keep from each other. We honor the dead. We bring them back to be welcomed by the motherland. We offer prayers so the moons will set light upon their paths to meet the gods. I gritted my teeth. And yet, you kept from our society a death. I saw shuffling of feet, mostly from the women. And I understood them. I had not expressed anger such as this in the past. What was written in the tenets about death? That upon the death of a Niven in a foreign land, the body must be immediately retrieved to protect the Niven identity. I shouted in frustration. I could feel the veins in my forehead tightening. Salvatore was watching me from a distance. He also stood with his family, all 7 of them. I looked around. The Mirasols were complete, all 5 of them. Beside them were the Puges, all 4 of them. And from behind were Sandalosses, all 8 of them. I started walking around, counting the heads of each family. No one seemed to be missing. A dozen families shivered as I walked past them, all complete. I looked behind me and found Elder Man. His face wore a mask of serenity. Could he have been making a fool out of me? I walked farther along until, in the darkness of the night, I saw one family huddled together. Alicia? I asked. The mother's shoulders jerked. Then she looked up. Her arms were holding her children, and I started counting. There were Jerem, Nolan, Pedro, Alice, Meninda. Joros was missing. I stared into Alicia's eyes questioningly. She paled as though to confirm my doubts. Was it Joros then? I asked. All at once, my rage dissipated. How could it be Joros? How could it be from Alicia Rella's family? The gods could be so cruel. Alicia rushed towards me and knelt before me. She grabbed my coat and started crying. Chief Hunter, please, I beg you, she wailed. I was supposed to tell you. I planned on telling you, but... All around us, the crowd went wild. There were gasps. I heard women wailing, talking to each other. The men were silent, as though they understood Alicia. And a part of me did, too, although it was wrong of her to keep this information from us. From the Nivens. I was supposed to tell you. Believe me, Chief Hunter. Please, I beg you. She said pleadingly. My husband had long ago met with the creators, and I couldn't risk becoming nameless. I have 5 more children. I cannot be nameless. What would become of them? Who would look after them if we are not welcomed in Nivedon as equals? My shoulders sagged. I had expected, hoped, that it would not be from her family. I watched as the woman wailed in front of me, clutching at my coat, begging me to not make her nameless. But these weren't my rules. These weren't my tenets. These were the community's. Alicia Rella, I said in a deep, guttural voice. I did not want to finish what I was about to say, but my authority made me the bearer of the sad curse. Your household is no more. You will live your days as nameless. Your children and the children they will bear are no more. You will walk Nivedan breathing and yet dead. Then I turned around. I could not stay to watch and listen to her wails, to her incessant pleading asking for forgiveness. Chief Hunter, she shouted. It wasn't my fault. It was the circumstance. Had I told you, what would have happened? You would retrieve the body of my son. And when he was back home and offered to the creators, what then? My family would still bear the shame of having a death outside Nivedan. What would you have me do? How I reacted was normal. What did you expect? I stared at her, my heart was breaking for her children. Her dead husband, Herod, was a dear friend. Honesty, I said. I walked away and vowed not to look back regardless of whether or not she called out. I passed beside Salvatore, who nodded his head at me as though in approval. Kobe was standing alone at the far end. He looked angry. I felt horrible. The bell tower was sounded again to reinforce the pronouncement I made. Now, we had to go to Canella and retrieve Joros's body. Our identities could not be compromised more than they already were. I needed to have Pyper back with me, otherwise, my household would be in danger too. No Niven wanted to be branded as one of the nameless. Elder Mayandilo. I felt sorry for Alicia Rella and her children. The punishment was harsh in all aspects. It was as Alicia argued, she had no choice. Either way, she would have ended nameless. But it was, from the little pieces of my knowledge, what the Niven tenets dictated. It was indeed a test of one's character and leadership when an event such as this happened. Right now, the Nivens went back to their tree houses. Worries hung over their heads like beacons. They had lived peacefully, keeping to themselves. They were no longer accustomed to what was happening outside, and for that, they were anxious. I was back in my cell. An hour ago, it felt good to get a glimpse of the world. The life of an elder required one to travel, and because of that, I was not accustomed to being confined in one place. I lay on the hardwood provided for my bed, but I could not sleep. Alicia Rella's wails kept on haunting me. What exactly did it mean to become nameless? Elder Mayandilo, you are being summoned to the town hall meeting. The chief hunter wants you, a stout Niven said. He looked edgy, and his lips were dark, which could only have developed from smoking tobacco. I sat up. Lead me to him, I said. The cell's hinges creaked as they opened wide to allow me to come out. Escorts surrounded me. Their hands were ready to bring out the sword in case I decided to run or summon my friends. When will they trust me? I wondered. Tonight, there were numerous stars scattered in the sky as though taunting us with their beauty, while down here on the mainland, people were suffering. I entered the tent and found Andoni talking to the Nivens. There will be 3 groups among us. We will leave Nivedan at the break of dawn. The first group will scout the area for the death tents. The second group will be the rescuing team. He paused, and I flinched. It wasn't as though we were rescuing someone still alive. I could feel the sadness in Andoni's voice. The third group will be in charge of cleaning up after the first 2 groups. Whatever traces the 2 groups leave behind, the last group must ensure that all such traces are removed afterward. He looked around, catching everyone's eyes, and measuring if they were listening to him. How big is the party? Salvatore asked. 36 men. What if the guards become suspicious? How will you fight them with 36 men? We do not engage in a fight. My instructions are clear. We will avoid the palace guards. Salvatore did not look convinced, but he did not say another word. A show of hands? Andoni asked. One by one, the hands of the Nivens shot up in the air. Bombay started writing down the names of the volunteers. Andoni saw me and nodded at me to acknowledge my presence. "I need you to join us," he said upon reaching me. "I can't turn invisible, Chief Hunter. I will only make the journey harder for everyone," I said. Andoni looked displeased. How can Nivens partner with anyone who refuses to take the first task that was asked of him? I flushed. "It's not that, Chief Hunter," I replied. "Call me Andoni. Nivens have not accepted a partnership with the Elders Guild, but we will be having another meeting after we retrieve the boy's body. Expect that a decision will be reached by then." "You don't need me in the retrieval," I argued. Andoni turned to face me again. "Quila boasts of its war dogs. They are trained to sniff out intruders. We may be invisible to humans, but the animals must be treated differently." "War dogs?" I thought inside my head. It's going to be a challenge. "Nivens won't touch the war dogs. You have to promise that," I said. "Why?" I wondered if it was right to divulge the weakness of my power to this man. "Animals are my friends. I won't have them treated with disrespect," I said simply. "You have my word. Nivens won't touch a war dog as long as it doesn't threaten to rip us into shreds." "I understand," I said. "Later, then. We leave at the break of dawn. You have a few hours to prepare your pack."
Quila Tash. When I woke up, I stared up at the sky. There were no more stars, as though it was about to rain. I sat and looked beside me. Goemi did not seem like she had moved in her sleep. The night was still dark, but it was time for me to get up and cook. For the past few days, I left that task to Goemi because I hated her. But that changed now that we had somehow become friends. I stood up and walked softly so as not to wake Goemi. But just my luck, the sounds of the horses' hooves suddenly filled the air. I searched where it was coming from. Behind me, Goemi sat up. Her eyes looked concerned. "Do you think it's them?" she asked as she stood beside me. "I don't know. I don't see anyone yet," I said. From behind the trees, a horse appeared. On its back was a boy. The dark was shrouding him, so it was difficult for me to make out who he was. "Is it Mayo?" Goemi asked. I squinted, and soon enough, I recognized the plump cheeks. "It's him," I said. My stomach twisted as though fish had started swimming inside it when I realized that he was alone. I did not get an answer to my question because Goemi ran towards Mayo. In a split second, I did the same. We reached Mayo almost at the same time, both of us panting. I could not say a word. I stared at Mayo's tired face. There were circles around his eyes as though he had not slept. His hair was a mess, as though he had been traveling hard. "Where are they?" It was Goemi who dared to ask what I was dreading to say. Mayo's eyes met ours. "The palace soldiers got Kino." "What? Where are Arden and Pyper?" I said. "They followed the palace soldiers. They will rescue Kino," he said. "Dear gods," Goemi muttered. "Where are they headed?" "The Canelan Palace, I suppose," Mayo said. That was when it all came back to me. The conversation Mayo and I had where he said that when Kino started presenting, the Emperor went mad. Dear gods. May the moon shine on their paths. I paled at the thought. Goemi was as pale as I was, if not more. "Is he the boy?" I stammered. "The boy the Emperor wanted dead," Mayo finished for me. "He is." I went even paler. "I knew it. I knew you'd only bring us trouble. Right from the moment your girlfriend shouted that Arden had a sword, I knew you'd bring nothing but trouble. And now Arden could die saving Kino." I shouted. I hated to admit it, but right at that moment, I wanted to run to Canella and save Arden. Forget about Kino and Pyper. I was walking very fast in circles. "She's not my girlfriend," Mayo shouted. He had dismounted from his horse. "I don't know about you, but I came back here to tell you what happened so that if friendship ever meant anything to you, you'd join me in rescuing all three of them." Mayo's eyes were piercing. He was angry and frustrated. Probably because of how I had reacted. I stared at him silently. Calmness still had not found me. "So you're one to talk about friendship and yet not understand it," Mayo said to me. After lecturing me about calling Kino a murderer, look who's turned her back on a friend. I flushed. He was right, and I felt ashamed. At least calling my friend a murderer didn't kill him. But turning your back on Arden could. So, who's the worst friend? He said. Every word Mayo said was accurate. I blinked back several times and averted my face away from his gaze. Come on. Mayo shouted. Let's rescue them. Don't tell me that I rode all the way here to hear you say you won't come with me? He was literally tearing at his hair in frustration. Goemi looked like she'd been doused with a bucket of cold water, tense and with pale lips. I don't think I can stay here knowing that they're all in danger, she said softly. Her lips barely moved, and it was as though I was dreaming. Everything was happening in slow motion. Mayo glared at me again. And you? Will you join us? I stared at him dumbfounded. I felt ashamed of myself. I wanted Arden safe, but that meant deepening my association with Kino, the boy the Emperor wanted dead. Would it be a wise move to do that? But then again, Arden was out there trying to save the boy's life. Yes, I said. I'll go with you. We have to take Miro, Mayo said. What? I stared at him in disbelief. We'll leave him here with Nia. No. He can freeze the hearts of the palace soldiers. Once he does that, it will be easy for us to rescue Kino. I don't feel comfortable using his power for this, Goemi said, shaking her head. What are you so afraid of? Mayo asked. That some soldiers may die? But what about our friends? Those soldiers, Mayo said, pumping his fists in the air, meant to bring Kino to the Emperor. What do you think will happen then, huh? It's not like the Emperor wanted to adopt Kino. The Emperor wanted Kino dead. Dead. Do you understand me? He shouted. When still no one answered, he kicked at a rock on the ground and sent it flying yards away. Arg! He shouted. I can't believe this is how you're reacting. I'll ask Miro to come, Goemi said. I turned to stare at her. Mayo did too. Perhaps I can make him understand. I'll talk to him, she said. Then Goemi walked towards the hut. I followed her in a trance. Hey, Mayo said as his hand grabbed my elbow. I looked at his flushed face. His eyes were sunken. He really did look worried. Thank you. I blushed. It's not a problem, I mumbled. Then we raced towards the hut to convince Miro to join us. I could not stop thinking about Arden. I knew how crazy he was. Kino would not die because Arden would rather lose his life than see a friend die. I shivered. I wish I had Arden's courage. After much thought and discussion, we finally settled on a plan. Nia would be let out from the confines of the room holding her prisoner, although this part was the most difficult to negotiate with Miro, especially since he had not spoken a word during the ordeal. Luckily, when we let Nia out of the room, Miro just grunted but did not do anything terrifying anymore. All of us sighed in relief after that. The other surprise of the day was Miro immediately agreeing to join the rescue mission. He did not say yes, but nor did he say no, either. Instead, he listened as his head swayed to and fro as though he was playing. And when Goemi started packing some things, he did not object. His actions were as good as him saying yes. We only have 2 horses, Mayo said. This will make it harder for us to catch up on them. We can buy some more. I have Arden's gold coins with me, I volunteered. Forgive me, Arden, but some of the coins need to be used so I can come after you and save you. Goemi shook her head. No. Arden's been saving that all his life, she said. I felt my affection towards her growing. I don't care if he yells at me for spending some of the gold coins. But what good is a circus show if the magician's no longer around to perform? Goemi froze. You're right. Come on, Mayo said. We have to start moving now. Nia joined us. Where are they headed? She asked. Canellan Palace, Mayo replied without looking at her. I'm not good with directions, I said. Mayo frowned. I know a bit about Akean maps. I study them in the library whenever Kino and I sought adventures. Mayo was waving his hands in his usual manner as though he could not say anything without making some wild gestures. Then he stopped when his eyes fell upon Nia. His mouth hung open. I looked around me. Miro tensed, and Goomy froze. What? I asked them. What's wrong? Mistress Lamare Amerk, Mayo said softly, almost in reverence.